No.
Yeah.
My garden.
The first Sunday we came
Yeah,
out,
I think he says that.
Okay.
there was the
We are doing basketball.
ocean liner out there parked in part of Mommy, it was a motor.
Yeah.
Had to be $1 million.
Yeah.
Whose was it, your parents?
No, not my family. Bruce Masson
Oh,
actually
don't
was
tell
driving.
me.
No, he was driving one for someone from Florida.
Well, I heard he went to Florida to get
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, that's what
Oh, is it his?
no, I don't know whose it is. He was driving it from Florida back to somewhere around
I
here.
was gonna say, Bruce is doing better than I thought. If he has that kind of, he don't need the cleaning job. He needs to let somebody that can use it.
Well, maybe that doctor bought an RV too. That bought the big old jet.
Yeah.
He just started riding jets.
That's our doctor.
Maybe that's like,
But I seen that big thing over there.
yeah.
25 years ago, I talked to a man that owned one of them. He was my boss. And at that time, the cheaper ones, a cheaper one, not his was older, but a cheaper one went from $250,000 right on up.
Really?
That had to be at least $1 million.
Really? Wow.
Or probably $1.25 million.
Wow.
Hey, that's a big boat. That was a big luxury line.
Oh, yeah.
Man,
I think how much he's saving on motel.
Oh, yeah. Let's stay on motel. Sure.
Oh, when you make one payment with it.
Yeah, sure. There's no way you got the money to pay for it, but other than that, it's just going away.
Yeah. I don't find a field that's.
But you're talking about saving on motels. We was in clear up in the north or along I-90 in Montana. Just before we crossed over the mountains, hot desert area, we went trailing up this little old road to go to a campground. We get up there, then there's a great big open parking lot, and that was for day use of this lake. So there was a little bitty old house there that the man that watched over it lived. So we went on up, and had gravel road, a little narrow, we had a little pop up. When we come back to let the kids go to that thing, here was this great big motorhome that tried to follow that road up there. He was pulling a trailer. It was 2 people, and in that trailer was an automobile. But it looked like it was a country music group, 2 people. Now that's the ones that want to do it so they don't have to follow directions, I guess. But he could own it. I mean, and they could not get it turned around. They had to move his shed. It was a portable. They had to move his shed, and then he was allowed to stay there because he couldn't get to the campground. All of a sudden, down went his little things. Set him right up.
That's funny.
Nice.
It's been a lot of years ago, and that's what I said. He could stay in some of the finest motels
For a long time.
for a long time.
There you are.
For a long time. Every night he could stay in the finest motels.
But you gotta,
For what that
you
costs.
gotta take your suitcase in and out. read
Well,
back
that's
every day.
right.
Or this way you have it right there.
Well, they may carry it for him, go to the campground, but that's not carried.
Well, anyway, I thought maybe it was your family, because I knew your dad was here.
Yeah.
We went fishing.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's my nosing. I just could not believe. And I figured they might be visiting here.
Yeah.
So this is the first Sunday. I just thought, because I didn't see nobody, and of course, we're always on this old part.
Gosh,
And we get out there
how,
about here.
gee, they had made it.
That wasn't us.
Oh, yeah, I would
And
drink
I
that.
thought, I mean,
Yeah, I really did. I really started spreading rumors there.
Then
Bernard, good boy.
you made up.
Yeah, well, he's a black man. But if anybody could, I would have anything else.
That'd be
Yeah, it kept it kind of the edge off.
Well, anyway,
Yeah,
I was
it's
wondering.
great.
Yeah.
Oh,
That
that
was
was
an
an
apple, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
man.
I felt bad.
He said this will last me 10 days, that one judge, what he said.
By the way, is he drinking it?
I already drank it all.
Have you made up any?
I drank all.
He made it up and drank it.
Not all of it.
Yes.
He's
I had a-
sick this week.
I had a bad stomachache for like 3 or 4 days.
That's because you drank it all.
No. Okay, beforehand.
That's why he had a stomachache and he started drinking.
Well, we still got 4 more of that,
Yeah.
Okay.
the same size, I got 4 more in the refrigerator, of course, she's gonna start making more.
Yep. All right. Sounds great. Yeah, it just happened to work out that way.
We'll keep you in,
I ran out Saturday and I was like.
we'll keep you healthy.
You
We'll
ready?
keep you healthy.
I drank it all.
The
I drank a lot.
extract.
I drank a lot. Yeah. My wife makes 2.5 gallons of green tea and 2.5 gallons of hibiscus tea, and I drink both on the easy. Yeah,
You do want something, don't you, Connie?
I drink a lot. Okay, this light that you have, how old is it?
Good age. $90 for $107. You don't even know nothing about it.
Well, there's no record anyway. It blows me away. Like,
I really can't tell you, it's probably 20 years in the kids here.
it's gotta be,
It's one for people who can't see.
Hey,
That's a girl ups. It's
Pretty soon,
Do they even have that?
pretty soon,
Yes.
she's gonna,
but they don't have record of your life.
Break in
It means
yourself.
all has to create the smell. We're talking mid-90s potentially.
we've got some weeks, so.
Yeah. Keep not doing it himself.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a-
you have to do that, that was just
Barrel ups.
it was a
No,
full
is
story.
that the one you got after I loaned you mine?
So what is
Yes.
it?
Tom was,
Mint tea, but-
I don't know.
Oh,
Well, of course, we don't have ours anymore.
Ball.
We don't have ours anymore.
Yeah.
Well, it burned in the fire, I guess.
What's that?
Well, you had
So
lamp
it's a-
used
it's
to
a
have
set
like
thing.
green light. I just said,
Well,
Yeah.
if we're mine, I'll buy someday.
Yeah. I like
And you might be able to break it.
Really?
Get one, we give ours.
Well, I do like.
right, just
Yeah.
shut it out and then it came on.
So
And
it's
we
something
thought,
just
well, it's
for
low,
a
we
glass full
just
of
had it
iced
like 2
tea,
months.
drink it all
Well,
day.
the other bulb probably went bad,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
side.
Alright.
Because we used to,
Yeah.
we're good.
Yeah, that ballast
Do you like
doesn't
that?
exist anymore.
Anyway, we raised our own kids, we raised this up,
Yeah.
and last
I had
year,
right by my chair, but I can't see it right now. And in the daytime, it's a long
Oh, yeah.
It's a 27-watt ballast. Now, I was able to find a 27-watt ballast, there's not one specifically for your light, that weird plug, it's got a really strange plug. And so I thought, well, maybe I can get this ballast and wire it to your light.
Tea bags and everything, make it.
But I didn't see the light in
Drink
there.
through it too quick.
See, I
Like I have
didn't
this
have
instant
food,
tea.
but I just hate to
powder.
get rid of that
I
one.
don't,
Oh,
It just sets on the floor.
I don't like
It comes out, it's got a
cloudy
arm, you know.
Yeah.
Mine just quit too.
I like tea made right off.
What was
Yeah.
it?
Great.
Well, it's actually Steve's one.
He
Sarah
did well.
Moore, and he was on this
I
mission.
used to help a guy on the farm, his mother made that, catch that.
And it didn't even get used to that much. It was just
All these
carry
serves.
on. And we both were just stunned.
You always
No, I was
dip in his
balanced
cookie.
everything, but
My tea.
And your tea.
I don't know, I didn't know that. Lori said, well, it's probably got a sugar.
That's why I wanna look at it, I wanna see if it's just a matter of getting a ballast, or if there's a wiring problem, or I need to see it.
And your lamps are so expensive.
I'm always thinking, oh,
They are, this one, this is just interesting too. It's all the time.
Okay.
Right.
Boy, was yours a bare lip? No, you-
Yeah.
I don't remember if that's the brand, but
but he,
I know you don't do.
I think you know, almost was gonna run me out. He called about time,
Because,
before he got there.
Yeah.
He
no,
was, he's trying.
Virgil bought a.
I saw someone drive by, pick up the bell head, and drove back.
That's the gift they gave you,
Very
you know,
something.
the bought back the barrel extract.
No, you don't do anything.
Oh, it's
And hey, if it wasn't that time of year, that's already,
Yeah,
I was
I'll have to ask him, but I was thinking it was when we bought the, what's the one they always
So
advertise
you might get your own meeting?
for the,
Well, sure, I got it on order. Shit.
you know, like
Won't
it had
even fit on
21
two
year
acres lot.
guarantee and then check it every year. And
no.
everything, so it was like, Ori, yeah, that's what it was, and you got free, that free land.
Might
No,
do that.
Mitchell got it with his,
Now, we was watching.
hotel points or miles on my airplane or, you know, whatever. Like, was the free gift. So we got it free.
They got it.
It was, they were expensive.
Finally, someone asked them, well, why don't you just stay in hotels
Well, I know very less lights are still there. I don't know, it's very clean parts of this life.
You know, I chimed in because that could be all, and I do go a lot to see my eyes and, but the lights are true light, which helps a lot too.
So everything all right with you?
Yeah, everything's going good.
I went to Veterans Day.
We'll try.
Oh, yeah?
We'll try. That's all I can tell you.
That's all
But I know the internet knows nothing about this thing,
Which one you go to?
nothing. And I can't even
Yeah.
rest.
So that model number didn't do
Yeah,
that.
You know,
The doctor called me.
when Steve worked at
June
the,
20.
or transportation center in Denver,
Called me about
at that time, of course, we're talking a long time ago now, but it was, this was old even then. But they still operated those computers with vacuum tubes.
Yeah.
So imagine what that
10 or
was.
10:30.
I mean, it was ridiculous at the time, because Congress had
Okay.
approved
Said, I need a blood test and I won't see you again.
XPs,
God.
when they
I
went
tell
out
you
all the
what,
way
every
back.
6 months.
Yeah,
Every 6 months.
Yeah,
that was far exceeding vacuum tubes.
yeah.
He said, I won't see you again.
How is that
Yeah,
possible?
and,
How is the VA
it
possible?
wasn't even with
Right.
my
You mean how nice it is or how they take care of you?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
how's it
exactly
taken?
what it's gonna tell me we have to make it
My
up.
grandpa always cursed
They no longer make
one
it.
down in Papa's left
I
all the
got
time.
it,
They go to the same
Sure.
place.
Vicious, but it's not the same company, it's not, that's right, it looks just like it,
Mhm.
you know. but
And
it
now,
is
the
just
thing that I've never was, they say you can go to some out in the outside world.
Oh, those new papers, those are those guys.
I feel better.
Papers are
Providing
I
the
don't know how true that is.
address or telephone number or something of the company.
Yeah,
I
they
think
go
that's,
to-
no, it's nothing, I wouldn't have, like Richard had his heart.
You call them, they get, can help you say,
That's right.
can you call them, they can help you.
I haven't even heard it.
One doctor.
They didn't even recognize it as theirs.
That's something that I got, you know, you have to be where it came from, because that's.
It's possible that very much like bought out or something, you know, and then when that happens, oftentimes like the old product just gets destroyed or lost or gone. So it's possible that just this new generation of products has no record of the old generation of products. The one thing's for sure, the internet knows nothing about it, okay?
So they just, I don't know everything.
But I think these 27 watt valves that you find might be the internals of what your light needs. It's just wired differently. So that's why I think when I look at your light, I might be able to just cross a wire or two and tune it my order. So it's
Cross the wire to, I don't know about that. I might get a real.
Are you an electrician, or you understand?
I am a hobbyist.
Well, it's not doing me any good way it is.
But see, that's what, I don't tend to mess with things unless they're totally dead, because then I call it. Yeah. I know how to. I did wire my initiative for communications, and I know the basics.
Really? That was parts.
No, this.
All right, so-
And you knew what to call that.
There you go.
To start.
Yeah.
You broken out my face.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Oh,
I was trying to
I
start.
think it should be stronger than.
It is time to start, except for I need a pen.
Really?
If I had a pen.
Yeah, well, that's good.
And there's a wire.
Oh, there's a pen.
Yeah.
All right, good evening, everybody. It is 7 o'clock, and we'll do something weird called starting on time.
Oh, no.
Oh, you sure?
That'd be weird for me.
You sick?
Yeah. Well, welcome. It is Wednesday, May 20th. You have your prayer list in front of you. Some good news today released by the CDC, as they said COVID-19 is not transmitted by surfaces. So I didn't feel any need to pre-distribute the flyers, so that's why you were able to go pick them up.
You know what they said about
Hmm?
steel surfaces would keep it alive for X amount of time.
No.
Yeah, 9 hours.
Maybe it's steel surface. Today they just said surfaces. That's all.
They can say what kind of.
But now today, the airplanes are starting to spray. They're learning every chemical. And then it's like everything.
Yep.
Well, let's see, who's the source?
Who knows what? But if they tell me I can be more lenient, I'm gonna be more lenient. So I'm done with the exaggerated part of it anyway. All right. Well, we are gonna go with our others with needs list, and we'll have one prayer for all three lists, and we'll start there. Talked to
Well, Bill and Velda, they're doing all right. Bill's still slowly healing, but doing all right. So we're thankful for that. Let's see. Bunzies, saw a Facebook update from them in Haiti. They're doing fine.
Did you see the
Haiti,
big fish that they had?
no,
Oh, they had this huge fish, and big old teeth and everything.
really?
It's weird looking.
All right.
They don't have a problem over there.
Not really, not much of one, yeah. But they're an island nation, you know, and it's not like there's been much travel recently, so, yeah. Let's see, what else do we know? Saw Charles Satterwaith last week in the CNR parking lot, and he's been working a lot for Advanced Medical, and Cheryl's at home. She's, you know, no worse, we might say. Hey, Rick. Let's see. Dave and Loretta continue to recover from their traffic accident in Indiana a few months ago. That's going to be slow going.
Did he break bones or just twist?
No, just bruised really bad. Yeah. Been doing a lot of physical therapy. Talked to Donna last week via text message. And she's all right. They're working at the nursery. This is their busy time of year, of course. But the weather hasn't been terribly cooperative. Lots of rain and pretty cold. Fred and Carmela, they're still at Lock Haven. The plan is for them to stay there. They're still locked down, of course, and that's probably going to be true for a while. One thing we do know about this thing is it does seem to affect the elderly pretty heavily, so we do want to be cautious with that. And they're already isolated anyway. You know, I was thinking a lot about this today when I was going over the prayer list, but our nursing home occupants are pretty isolated even without a disease going around, and now that there is one, they're really isolated, and that's a pretty lonely existence. So if you think about it, I've been sending cards and things like that, so anything brightens up their day. A couple of minutes postcard can make a big difference, whatever you can do. But our nursing home folks definitely need encouragement, because even when this thing is largely over for us, it won't be over for them. So Sean and Georgette continue to pursue this house in Macon. Hopefully that'll finalize any day.
Did they sell theirs down there?
They're in the process of it. Yeah, it's just an inconvenient location for them. It's pretty territory, but there's a lot of compromises. Saw Janet and Leroy here Sunday, and they seem to be doing okay. Jim and Carol were here Sunday. That was cool. Jim had to go in his car halfway through the service because his neck was hurting him too bad, but he was here and grateful for that. Let's see. Somebody told me they talked to Miriam just like a day or two ago, and she was all right. I don't remember any details though. Marilyn Freeman just doesn't seem to be getting better. She's not getting worse, but she's not getting better. And still at home, still on oxygen, and definitely needs our prayers.
Is she in the hospital?
Well, she was. She had an operation a couple months ago.
Oh, she's just not going
She's at home. She's not getting worse, but she's not getting better. They thought she'd be off by oxygen a month ago and just hasn't made progress like she was hoping for. So it's been kind of a mixed blessing because Ann, she works at the school, but the school's been closed down, so Ann's been able to be with her all the time, so that's been kind of a good thing, never had to be alone. So that, that's been useful. Wendell was here the past couple of weeks, good to see him. Let's see. We haven't got to the cancer list yet, but we'll get there. How's Savannah doing?
She called me today, she sounds to be doing good.
Okay. Good deal.
Keep chilling the ringer off.
It's really funny when I'm preaching and I realize I haven't turned my cell phone ringer off, and I very discreetly try to do it without anybody noticing. So, if you ever see me fooling around in my pockets, that's what I'm probably doing.
I think it's funny when someone calls you and your phone starts vibrating.
Well, that's better than it ringing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That happened to me once on a Sunday night. I don't know if any of you remember that, but it did happen to me once. So I try to do it Saturday night so I don't even have to think about it Sunday morning. But yeah. Well, anybody else on the others with needs list? I don't want to skip anybody.
Just keep Megan in your prayers. She's working and doing all right. We don't see none of her.
Oh, really?
I put the dog out, takes the dog in, and she gets in and gets at home about 8, well, about 7:30, they work at all 7:30, probably 8 or a little after.
Okay.
She sleeps and about 10:30 at night, she heads out.
Really?
And she works 7 days a week, and she said that's the way it looks like it's going to be. Last time I talked to her, asked her about this, court date. She has no idea, she can't get a hold of it, but it's federal. Federal,
Yeah.
in no hurry.
The courts are not in any hurry.
Well, federal.
Most cases here in Macon County have been delayed till August or later, so they're only doing the minimum.
This has been before this ever started.
Right,
She could never get a hold of it.
but it'll be pushed even further back now. And I'm sure she's a low priority case because she's a first time thing, so, there's no guarantee as to when they'll get to it.
But just keep her in your prayer.
Yep, will do.
I know she's got to be whatever, depressed.
Oh, sure, yeah. I think a lot of people are dealing with that just because the uncertainty of what's been going on and the isolation has really done a lot of people harm, and that's no fun at all. I just so you know something about me, I'd rather talk to somebody in person for 10 hours than 1 hour on the phone. I'm not a phone person. I'll do it if I have to, but I'm not a phone person. And I think it's because from business, I had 40 phone calls a day when I was in business, and I just have this like gut reaction towards the phone that's negative.
You like Texas? I don't.
I do everything. I mean, I'll call anybody and I'll text and I'll Facebook and I'll do anything, whatever anybody likes. But I'd rather talk to you in person for 10 hours than over the phone for 1 hour any day. So it's been hard on me in that sense because I'd prefer go visit people than just talk to them over the phone. That's my.
I haven't heard you in Walmart lately.
I know. That's been difficult. Like, can't go to the jail, can't go to the hospital, can't go to the nursing home.
You do the right thing, you can go to jail.
True. If I hang out at Walmart too long, they're all over me. It's like, it's very difficult to do outreach right now,
Walmart today, the first time since forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
You didn't have one talking to.
That's what,
This happened to me, I get so frustrated, they never have what I need, so.
To give you an idea, and this is not a boast, this is just me telling you of filling time, but I did have a couple extra hours yesterday and today, so I went to the cemetery and mowed. They don't have anybody mowing it right now, so it's getting tall and gross, and so just some of us have been volunteering and going out there, and we're just trying to keep, it reasonable, because Memorial Day's coming up, But, I'll choose people over a lawnmower any day, but eventually you've sent out every card, text message, and phone call you can and before you start annoying people pretty much. And so at that point, you're like, well, it's finally come down to this. I'm going to go push mow. Because that's what needed to be done because it's too wet to ride on. So, yeah. My shoes, in fact, you can tell the green.
I've seen that.
Yeah, I'm just, and this is, I ordered a new pair of shoes, but they haven't arrived yet because, Amazon's 3 million weeks behind. And so I'm walking around with green shoes right now. I have to hand dry with a towel and a blow dryer because it's so wet out there. All right. Well, let's move on to the cancer list. Let's see if we have any updates up there. By the way, if anybody's listening and through some miracle I haven't got a hold of you, please let me know. I don't want to leave anybody out. I feel like I've actually bothered people as much as I've tried to. I know Alex feels kind of the same way sometimes. You're like,
Get short text back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just want you to know that I care. That's all. Let's see. I don't know if much has changed in the past week. How's Mary doing? Okay. All right.
Still working.
Mhm. Julius, hear from Julius?
I talked to him, and he's doing really good. I was out mowing, so I couldn't get him, but
Okay,
he's doing really good. But he thinks, this nurse told him that they're talking about taking him off.
okay,
And I hate to see him do that, because that's what happened with Terry there, and it just boom. And he is what, 70?
I'll be 77, around 7, I'll be 76.
And he doesn't get sick or
I'll be
anything like
75,
Terry
I'm
did.
sorry, I'll be 75.
Al, you don't look like you're 75, you're doing good.
Anyway, 75 in June, so he's at least 2.5 years older than I am.
That's
So
why I
he's
said
born in
77.
February.
Okay,
I figured he was 76.
I hope I'm as good looking at you as 75, that's pretty good.
I could blind you if I let you look.
You can always tell me there's no back there.
If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all, that's fine.
Well, thank you anyway.
You're welcome. Our nation and active military. I do not have any updates on that list. And usually no news is good news on that list, so we'll take it. All righty. It's good to see, just, not making any commentary about anything, but just good to see how states are reopening, and largely speaking, we haven't seen any massive spikes or huge problems, and that's good. We need to get things going again as safely as possible, as quickly as possible, so that's good. Grateful our county still has no cases, and I've never had a period of time in this church where I haven't had to go to the hospital for 2 months. So that's been great. We have a lot to be grateful for. In fact, just being at the cemetery the past couple of days mowing, and you go by a grave of a teenager or an infant, and you think, my goodness, I've got it so good. I've got so much to be grateful for. And all my kids are working and are healthy, and even Luke's handled this pretty well, so I'm grateful. All right, well, anybody else updates? No? Okay, well, Rick, would you have a prayer for these? Thank you.
Our gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, we come before you, Lord, this evening, just grateful for the opportunity, grateful for this building that we can gather in, just for the health that we have. Just pray you continue to be with those friends and family and folks on our prayer list, Lord, and those who may not be on our list, Lord, that are our hearts and minds. Just pray you're with them. We grateful to hear that some have improved. We know there are still others that are hurting, especially with the cancer list, Lord, and just ask that you comfort them, comfort their families, and be with our people and all the people in the long-term care facilities, Lord. Just pray for them, pray for peace for them, pray for their health. Just be with this country. Just grateful for the nation that we have, and just thankful for the freedom and those who fought to give us this freedom. Just grateful for everything we have. It's in Jesus' name I pray.
Amen. All right. Well, just a couple of announcements here. A couple of people have taken advantage of the fact that if they don't feel like they want to quite get out yet and they need help getting their TV or computer or whatever hooked up, let me know. I've had some people, had 2 households in particular contact me, and I helped them get it where they could watch it on their television. So that made it more comfortable for them. So let me know if anybody else needs that. We're going to have senior recognition or graduate recognition on June 7th. So if you have anybody that we want to recognize, please let Alex or I know so we can be sure to do that. We'll be getting them an e-gift. Let's see, there's, of course, the old lessons that can be watched online. We're still recruiting for our bus ministry. That's all we have to announce at the moment. Connie?
My granddaughter in Mississippi watches our
Oh, cool.
thing on, she says, I'm going to Cali.
All right. In fact, yeah, Rick?
Oh, I was gonna say, were you able to change the date on last week's? You got it labeled wrong. You got it as May 7th.
Oh.
May 17th.
Oh, fun. That might explain why I didn't understand why May 17th didn't show up.
Yeah, I think, because I went home last weekend later and today to watch it, I wanted to see the recording and see
Yeah.
how things went, and I couldn't find it, and they said, well, it's titled the wrong thing. So anyway,
Oh, and by the way, daytimers this week and tonight will be audio only if you go back and listen to it. Because for some reason, whenever Alex is in the picture, we get a copyright strike from YouTube. We have no clue why. Yeah, there's something about his face that the YouTube algorithm thinks we're stealing somebody else's video. So to prevent problems, anytime Alex is in front of the camera, I turn off the camera.
wearing masks, Alex,
I don't know. And YouTube isn't answering any questions right now, so I don't know. We're just gonna go with audio only. So if you're curious as to why we're doing that, that's why we're doing that. So that means when you preach at the end of the month, I don't know what we're gonna do.
Face it to the crowd.
Or just zoom it out enough where you can't be seeing all that well. I don't know. We'll have to figure that out. But we've tried it like 3 or 4 times, Rick. Every time Alex is in the picture, about 3 minutes in, it'll cut us off.
What we need to do is do a test run like on a Wednesday night, Thursday night, before Sunday's sermon, zoomed out.
Yeah.
Zooming in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes 3 or 4 minutes for it to pick up.
Yeah.
One time I realized when I was doing my whole lesson, so.
Yeah.
That was great. I read and speak it. I was like,
So Tuesday daytimers, I didn't take a chance, because
No, I know she said daytimers was just talking and she couldn't see nothing.
yep, that's the way it is right now. And since Alex is teaching tonight,
Joke on me because she does that.
no, it's true. So I apologize, but I haven't had any answers yet as to what that is. So you must look like some famous person that I'm not even aware of. So
Me either.
yeah, good enough. All right. Well, if that's all the announcements we have, I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
All right. Did everybody pick up an outline over here by the prayer list? All right. So if you've been here for a daytimers lesson that I've taught, whenever I hand out a piece of paper, I always say, don't read ahead because you're going to look at the answers. Well, I did my best to go ahead and erase all the answers. So your outline is 1 page and mine is a few pages. So you can't cheat. But for those of you on the live stream, I want to apologize. We have a lot of Bible verses and a lot of things to jump around on. So I'll try my best to keep you all able to follow along the best we can, but having a piece of paper in front of us helps a lot. So this week we are going to be talking about earnestly contending the faith. And I want to start off by asking y'all a question. What comes to your mind when you hear someone say, I am a Christian?
It's changed over time.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely so. That's what I was wanting to talk about, that change. Like, what does it mean?
They go to church.
You would assume they go to church. Yeah.
Well, didn't you say you assume you don't know?
That's what I said.
Yeah, you don't know. That's just it. Yeah.
Well, it's a percentage. I forget what percentage, but it's a high percent of Americans claim to be Christians. And if that was true, I don't think we'd have the problems we have today.
Well, I hear it all the time in the jail. Guys will say, I'm a Christian. And I'm like, tell me about that.
Yeah.
And I'm not denying that they are. But I want to know more because why are you here? Yeah.
Cultural.
Yes.
Cultural influences make people think they're supposed to say that, whether they believe it or not.
Right.
A lot of people don't think about it.
Some of them is because it's mom and dad's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm out and around all kinds of Italians, and they'll swear up and down they're Catholic. You won't see one of them in Catholic church. I haven't been in years.
Yeah. Because mom and dad go. I was raised there. Yeah.
These people are old now.
Yeah.
And, but they'll tell you they're Catholic.
Yeah. 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 I was kind of thinking that people say they're Christians because they believe that God exists. Maybe they're not atheists, so they have to be Christian.
Yeah.
That might be their logic. Yeah.
It's a loaded term.
So the thing that came to my mind was to ask them, like if I heard someone say I'm a Christian, I'd immediately ask them, what church do you go to? Or maybe, how long have you been going to that church? To church of whatever. There's all kinds of denominations. Might ask them what that denomination believes, because there's all kinds of different ones. names keep getting longer and longer, and I can't keep track of them all. So I always want to have a conversation with them. But I think you're right, Katie. When you say I'm a Christian, that's changed over time. In the past, we had certain, well, I'd like to feel like back in the Bible days when it was getting written down, we had some core beliefs that we all kind of went by. Now, that's changed. And I think that topic there is what we're going to study today.
One other thought is, there's an absolute meaning to that term, otherwise what the Bible says that means, and then there's everybody's relative opinion, which is what we've been talking about here.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, because
I
like,
think it's more than believing in God, I think it's
yeah,
believing that Christ existed. I don't know that everybody understands what they're saying. But Christian means you believe in God, Christ.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. And his teaching, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's take this a step further going along with this I am a Christian statement. What do you think people who don't go to church, what do you think that means to them when they hear someone say I'm a Christian? The Bible thumper, yeah. Yeah.
I think they expect you to be an honest person, you know.
To have some standards higher than what the world has. Mm-hmm.
No, I would disagree with you, Greg. I think, because they think they would be in church. I think sometimes people get burned by people that call themselves Christian, that don't behave in a Christian way.
Absolutely.
it's actually one reason when I was in business, I didn't bring it up,
Mm-hmm.
because so many people have been burned by people who call themselves Christians. I know landlords hate it when people try to use that as a way to get something or whatever. It's like, yeah, it can really be, it has a lot to do with just the person who says it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was thinking that people would say, like, you're judging me. Like, Christians judge the world, you know, because, oh, we're Christians, we follow God, we're not sinners like you. Well, yeah, we are. We're humans, we make mistakes. So, and I've even heard some people say, I can't believe in God because I can't believe in a God who condemns someone to hell for not following him. I'm just like,
Oh, yeah,
all right, there's nothing I can say to you.
You know,
That's really
when somebody gets, like I notice this in the jail a lot, when guys get offended quickly,
mm-hmm.
what's useful is if I let them tell me why and I let them keep talking until they are done.
Mm-hmm.
That's what kind of lowers their shields.
They just let it all out.
Yeah, let them get it all out. Because if you actually listen to them and they believe you listen to them, then they'll listen to you.
That's a good point.
I learned that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So my final thought on this is, I've even heard some people say, well, the Bible has some contradictions. They'll just look at you and be like, what contradictions? Well, they're in there.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
It's like, all right. So,
Well, what I've learned about the contradiction, because I felt that way, is that if you cherry pick what you're reading and you don't know the whole story,
yeah.
that's when you find the contradiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But isn't it kind of true if you look at modern day church, there's a lot of contradictions in our beliefs. Some think you just have to say a prayer to be saved, and while we might say you have to be repentant of your sin and baptized, and then be faithful. God forbid you have to do something to keep your salvation. You have to follow the Bible. That's asking a lot. Some people don't believe that. Or some think you're predestined to. You don't have to do anything. You're just luck of the draw.
Well, and I think the thing that really gets in the way of that is how easily offended people are nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when, for example, I had a situation, about a month ago over email where somebody was interested in our church and they were emailing me back and forth. And of course, you know, they're going to eventually ask a question that I'm going to give them an answer they're not too fond of. And one of their questions was, and it was a lady asking, although I've had men ask this too, would your church support a woman preacher? And I you know, and then I have to say no, you know, and I'm not apologetic for that answer because it's biblical. Now, number one, I get why people would be offended at that. I understand that because culturally it's not acceptable to have that answer right now. But two, I can't apologize for truth.
Absolutely.
So what gets in the way is not the truth or a discussion. What gets in the way is their offense. Because you know what? I can disagree with you and not be offended, but can you disagree with me and not be offended?
Yeah.
That's the issue a lot of the time.
Well, if they knew the Bible very well, they'd know that you don't have to.
But they don't. Very few don't.
Well, I've even found that people can know the scriptures and just simply deny them.
That's right.
Just simply, like I'll point out, 1 Corinthians 14:37 or 1 Timothy 2:12, and they just say, well, that's just cultural. It's interesting how Paul says in both of those verses, in all the churches I teach. And there's even a handful of people, I believe, in this church who would be offended at that, just by nature. And I understand why, because it spits in the face of modern culture, but it's also true.
Yep.
So what's useful is a discussion, not offense.
Absolutely.
And I think we'd get a lot further in a lot more issues in the world if we could just simply have a discussion half the time.
For sure. For sure. Good conversations, everybody. Thank you. And just further that.
Can I say one more thing? I'm sorry. I know I'm occupying the discussion.
You're fine.
It's the problem of being a preacher in the audience. Now, what I will tell them is, but you're more than welcome to come to church here. Like, you don't have to agree with me on that to come to church here. In fact, to come to church here, you don't have to agree with me on anything. Hear me out and let's have a discussion. I'm not going to prevent anybody from coming to church.
Absolutely.
So I always tell them, you're welcome here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want anybody to think that you can't walk in our door if you don't agree with us on everything.
Yeah.
That's a surefire way to make sure that we die eventually.
For sure. And it's our goal to help get them to the
One of the reasons why I came to an understanding of what I understand to be truth is because people were patient with me. They didn't expect me to understand everything out of the gate. They let me figure it out and ask questions and even disagree for a while. And then over time, I was able to surrender to God's word, but that took a while.
Yeah.
So I get that. All right, I'll try to shut up.
You're starting a story about a woman. I was like, oh, Josh is going to pick on women again. One day, yeah, stories of stories.
I had a daytimer's lesson that had I didn't even realize it when I wrote it, but afterwards I realized I had told 8 stories about different women, and I thought, I'm really picking on the women today. And one of my remote watchers called me later, I've got a beef with you. I'm like, oh, what's that? She's like, you just told stories about women today. I'm like, I know, I didn't realize that. It was just coincidental, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Right, yeah. I can't win.
All right. So, putting everything that we talked about together, people's hurt feelings, different beliefs, different man-made opinions on the Bible and the faith, I think that the outside world, people who don't come to church, might have a point on what they think Christians are, or the term, I am a Christian. It's a really broad, confusing thing. You can't say I'm a Christian and believe this, this, and this. It's all different. You don't know. And so I think that we as Christians, I'm saying Christians in general, not just our church, not just our community, it could be our community, yeah, but I think we're really divided. And I think that it's kind of our fault because we accept so many people as Christians with their different beliefs. We're accepting to it. We're all right with it. And so my question, my thinking for this is, what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? And I think the first thing that we can do is kind of do a little study and understand what our faith is. Because you can't correct something if you don't quite understand it. And what I think is our faith is one faith. It's unified, it's singular, and it has a purpose. I think throughout the whole Bible, or throughout the New Testament, it's always been one faith. And let's first flip over to Ephesians chapter 4, and let's read verses 4 through 6. If I could have a volunteer to do that, that'd be great.
There is one body and one spirit, just as also you were called in one hope of your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all, in all, and in all.
Thank you, Jim. You flipped there fast. You're almost done by the time I got there. Good job. So whenever you read in the Bible about faith, no matter the language, no matter if it's Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, or anything, it's always in the singular. So it's not plural, it's not multiple faiths, it's just faith. And Scripture throughout it is all consistent and all being singular. No exceptions whatsoever about that. And some other terms, well actually let's read one more thing. We're flip over to 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5. If I got someone read that for me, please.
Examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Do you not realize that Christ Jesus is in you, unless of course you fail the test?
All right, thank you, Mickey. Notice how it just says faith, not faiths, or plural. It's singular. So it's consistent through the New Testament. That's always singular. And the examples I have on your paper, Acts 6:7, 1 Timothy 4:1, and so forth, all has faith in the singular in it. And there's a lot more verses. I didn't list them all. That's not all of them. So I'm sure next time you see the word faith, you might think, oh, this is singular. But also in the Bible, there's also some different terms that are used. Depending on your translation and what year it's made, the terms vary. But in our NASB today, the term is teaching. So some other words for it, depending on your translation, is doctrine, gospel, and ours is teaching. And those two are in the singular form. So let's flip over to Acts chapter 2 and read verse 42.
Hey, before you go there, Alex.
Yeah?
I was just realizing 2 Corinthians 13:5 would make an excellent communion devotion
Oh, yeah?
text, because it says, test yourselves to see if you're in the faith. Examine yourselves. What are we supposed to do around the communion table every Sunday?
Examine ourselves.
Yeah. So I thought, boy, that'd be a good text for a communion devotion.
Throw me that pen. I got to prepare my communion devotion still.
It just occurred to me, like, that's a really good one, and it just now occurred to me. Like, it's amazing how you can read and reread the New Testament. You just continue to have new revelations all the time.
Absolutely. That's the great thing about the Bible, too. You can memorize it. It seems like each time you read it, there's always something that comes out.
Yep.
So where was I at? Acts chapter 2, verse 42.
Yep.
Any volunteers would like to read that for me?
They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer.
Thank you, Rick. So there the word, the apostles' teaching. We take the apostles' teaching today as doctrine or the gospel, as we have it here. But back then it was their teaching, and so that's all in the singular. That's all unified. And really the Christian system, the whole way the Bible works and everything, it's set by God. He demands that there be one faith coming from one God. Notice how man doesn't have opinion on this. It's all coming from God. And there's only one God. Well, the Trinity, you can get into that, how they're three different things, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But it's all coming from one thing. And that's from Ephesians chapter 4, verse 5. And then we don't have to flip there. We're not going to read it. That's just there for your benefit if you want to study that further. And also that one God, our one Lord, has all authority, found in Matthew chapter 28, verse 18. So we know that all the faith, the one faith, is coming from Him, the one true God. So here's a question for you guys. Can there be another gospel or message that has not been sent by God? No. Is there today? There's no true messages. People seem to think they have their own in their own inner life or vision or dream or appearance by an angel. Who knows? But that is not of God. See, we should be of one mind, one judgment, and speaking the same thing. Christ is unified. The church should be unified. That comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. So that brings us to bulletin point number 4 on your sheet. And it is labeled the battle between church and falsehood.
Okay, before you go on,
Yeah?
I was reading this 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. And it says, I exhort you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all agree, and there be no divisions among you, but you be made complete in the same mind and in the same judgment. Now, Paul wrote that verse to a very, very divided church. And I mean, just look at how long 1st and 2nd Corinthians are. It's Paul's longest letters.
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing with a divided church, an immoral church, a church he had to write a second super long letter to. They still had lots of problems going on. I've had this verse brought to my attention, and people act like this verse should be something that can be accomplished immediately. I don't see that. When you look at 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians and you look at Paul's relationship with that church, obviously this is a goal. This is something he's aiming for, we should aim for. But is it something that we're going to immediately sort the sheep from the goats? No.
No.
I think oftentimes truth is sometimes not just the highest value, but the only value people have, and they throw out things like patience and kindness, and all those things are biblical too. So, I'm all about truth, but we need to be patient and kind in order to get there. Like Paul says, if you know all truth, but you don't do it in love, it doesn't matter. And that's in 1 Corinthians 13, by the way, same book.
Yeah.
So, and one thing I run into all the time when I'm doing evangelism is people will tell me, I know this is true because I feel good about it. That's more or less what people tell me half the time. And it's not emotions that tell us the truth.
Right.
At the same time, you're not going to get anywhere if you constantly offend people's emotions because they do rely on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's a tricky thing.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because you can't teach a lesson like this or tell people to go tell other people what to do or how to change their faith or how to make it better. I'm teaching at the Wednesday night Bible study because I think you guys are some mature Christians who understand people enough and might be able to actually do it. I can't teach us to junior worship because they're kids who don't understand feelings. Can you imagine how that would go? I know in my earth science class when they were teaching on evolution, I wasn't too nice to the teacher.
And you didn't convince him.
It was a she.
Okay, whatever.
Now I'm picking on the girls.
I know. But my point is, we don't get anywhere being offensive for the sake of being offensive.
No, not at all. Not at all. And I think the thing that we do is we can be earnestly contend for the faith. And that earnestly isn't right now, change their mind right now. That earnestly means that we should do it without hesitation. We should still come about it, loving, patiently working with someone. But if you sit around and wait, you know what? That seems like something good to do next month. Now's a good time to catch some crappie. I'll do that right now and worry about this later. No, it's something that should be on our mind. Something that I'm passionate about. I hope that you guys are too. But sadly, if it was a perfect world, not sadly. Sadly, this isn't a perfect world. And the truth is there is false doctrine out there. And I don't know, you can call them denominations, you can call them cults, and you can call them whatever you want, but they're teaching a false gospel. And the result of that is people are going to be going to hell. And I think that's a really serious thing. Because people should have in my head, I'm if it sounds off to you, look in the Bible and get it right. But people don't do that. Maybe we need someone to be sent out to go talk to them, to get them to think, maybe to show them through the Bible. Maybe I don't know. It's just my hope that something happens anyway. I hate seeing false doctrine preached. But
So that brings up the question, and I'm asking you, there has to be an appeal to false doctrine or it wouldn't be taught. So what are the various appeals?
What appeals to your flesh makes you feel more comfortable.
Okay, that's definitely whatever matches the culture at the time. Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And the reason why I think this is relevant is because you have to figure out, the person you're talking to, you have to figure out what has convinced them into falsehood.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had a guy recently in the court. We have a really cool local government because they call me all the time to go talk to this person or that. You can't say that about a lot of local, governments, but I talked to this guy who's on trial right now, and his case, it's not important as to the details, but he's convinced because he listened to Joel Osteen on television that if he has enough faith that his court case will be fine and he doesn't need to hire a lawyer or anything. And when I told him that's not going to help you, Like, he was just devastated. He thought every preacher agreed with Joel Osteen. And it was a really tough conversation to have. And I could tell he wasn't convinced necessarily by what I had to say, but I could tell he was deflated. And that was tough because I wasn't trying to discourage him. I was actually trying to save him from doing something super stupid.
Yeah.
You know, representing yourself in court with a serious felony is a really dumb thing to do.
Don't you think that falls under the heading of they don't know any better?
Yeah. You know, they're gullible. Yeah.
They're searching for something and they thought that might be it.
Yeah, they just latch on to the first thing that feels good.
Or
Yeah.
maybe you were born into it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough thing. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're fine. You're fine. I was thinking on that. That's something else. But
Yeah, I gotta figure out what appeals to people.
all right, to get back on my paper here. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
just
welcome,
kidding. I'm
man.
just kidding.
Can't help it.
It's always interesting.
I'm terrible.
So another thought that I had was we always preach or teach about going and teaching the lost, the people who never heard of Jesus, never heard of the gospel. Why do we never talk about correcting the ones who know a false gospel?
Isn't that what you were saying before about confronting people isn't the way to win them over?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm shifting gears from that. Like, why is it not preached? Like, why don't you hear that from different? I'm not saying Josh doesn't do it or anything. Just
Well, I'm not picking
It's
on
not
you, but I
a
think
topic.
never's a little farther. I think there is discussion about correcting the ones. There's a lot of disagreement as to how to do it. You know, I discover that there's a lot of, you might even call it macho talk about how we need to just like beat truth into false teachers. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of, you know, we just like you mentioned earlier, Candy. There's people out there who grasp on, they're desperate, basically, and we forget that most people are sheep. Most people go with the flow. Most people, their highest value is no conflict at any cost, so they just believe or go with whatever keeps them out from being shamed or embarrassed or whatever. And I mean, by no means am I an authority on this, but just from my experience, I do talk to people about correcting the false gospel, but I find, just because of my own experience, it's a slow process. You know, and I don't try to introduce more than one difficult subject at once. If you bombard people, like let's say you go to a denominational person and you say, well, I disagree with you about baptism, church government, communion, and you just keep going down the list, you're not going to get anywhere.
No.
You know, I start with the most important thing, which is salvation, and then go from there.
Yeah.
And if I don't win them on church government, well, that's not as big as, like, I see people argue about creation and evolution, for example, but they totally forget about Jesus. Well, just because you believe in creationism doesn't make you any more than a Muslim or a Jew.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you got to prioritize what really matters. Christ is first, and what he commands is first. And I think people often get wrapped up in other things that, although we're dealing with truth and falsehood, even the Bible puts priority on some subjects. So I try to avoid confrontations about lesser things. You know, I believe in the creation account and I will contend for it, but I'm going to make sure people know about Jesus and salvation before I go into that subject.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks.
Anyway, I'm thinking, we talk about, if you correct someone, it kind of feeds into the stereotype of the person that's flimflam, or maybe trying, what makes you brighter than this other person that I'm actually.
Which is why I think a friendship can make all the difference in the world, you know. People don't tend to take correction from strangers under any circumstances.
Well, and you tear up values, which makes people feel uncertain, it maybe turns them off completely.
Well, and I found that
if that person believes I'll still be their friend if they disagree with me, there's a much better chance they'll listen.
That's a big challenge these days.
It is, but, you know, I'll let people tell me any crazy, I get told crazy stuff all the time, from religious and non-religious folk. It seems like the whole world's nuts, it's just we don't know it. And I still let people know, look, you can tell me anything. People do it all the time. Even when I was a computer technician, people would tell me crazy stuff all the time because they found out I was a preacher. And I've learned to let people tell me any crazy thing they want to, because if they feel like I'll still be their friend, then they'll listen to me. But if they think I'm going to be offended at what they tell me, then there's no chance.
And if people are judging us.
Yes, and I'm not their judge. God is. You know, I've had people, like, because I'm a preacher, they'll say things like, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cuss around you." I'm like, what difference does that make?
I'm not
You
your
should
judge.
fear God, not me, and He's always here. You know, and that's a funny way you can correct somebody. You know, and humor helps. There's lots of ways of doing it that don't involve a baseball bat. So,
For sure,
which is what I think people often use verbally as a baseball bat.
for sure.
Yeah.
You know, you was going back to the woman preacher.
Yeah.
I went up Kansas City, 2000, to work, and I spent 14 months up there. And I drove up there on the old highway. I went through Missouri City. There was a little Christian church there. To work, I know why I couldn't find it. That was the disciples.
Yep.
Okay. There was an old preacher that was there, dressed in black. He'd been there for 5 years. Every Sunday they'd give him a check and just called him. He was just filling it. Don't you know that? Finally, and she didn't like me to go there later because he had believed that a woman who had been in that church preacher, she got her son raised up to 12, her husband died, she got him raised up to 12 years old, and so she wanted to come back and preach, and that was her home. Well, anyway, but I didn't argue the point so much. I had never heard of the Dr. College. We're now doing it here. But it was great, I liked it. We still had communion, but didn't like the woman preacher. But there was no, they watched over me, took care of me. So I didn't argue that point, if that's good or bad. I knew what I knew. So they wasn't going to change me. But other than that, it's, you know. And as far as women, elders, or anything, I never seen any. Not here, not there. Here I am. But not there, but there is here in Maine. But anyway, I just went on. I didn't care for the woman preacher, but there was some strings. She wore a heavy coat. This is part of her faith, I guess. Every Sunday morning, she brought the little children up and taught them before service. And told some Bible stories or something they could understand. And then we went into service. So basically, I accepted what, you know, I didn't accept it. I knew what was what. I still, but to try to change them would have been of no use.
At best, it would have been a multi-year process. And that's the truth.
And I was only there for 14 months and tickled to have someplace to go.
Right. I had a friend, very good preacher, but not a tactful friend. Let's just put it that way. Not a diplomat. This is a good way of putting it. And he went to a church that had women elders and a women preacher before him, and he thought he was just going to change them. Well, in 14 months, he was the one that was fired, and they actually went back and went even further the other direction. Because it turns out that you can, through truth even with truth, you can make things worse. Because if people don't feel like you love them, they'll run the other direction. Like, really. And that's a hard thing to accept, but it's true. You know, we want to believe that all that matters is truth. But truth is the highest value, but the mistake people make is that they think it's the only value. And patience and kindness and love is right up there with it. And it's that mix that makes it work.
When Connie come up there, she would go with me to church, but she wasn't happy. She wasn't happy. But we received communion. There was a good sermon. No browbeating me. I never try and change him, although they know better than having a woman as a preacher. Oh, what was I going to do? You know what I mean? But as far as the buildup of elders and all that, I've never seen any women involved. There wasn't but a handful of people.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, like the preacher boys, they have went to churches and preached where there was a woman preacher and they've done a filling. I guarantee you, if they went the first sermon and preached against women preachers, wouldn't do a lick of good. It wouldn't. It wouldn't do a lick of good. You gotta establish a relationship. You gotta, it's not a matter of being sneaky or anything. It's a matter of they learn to trust you so that when you tell them the truth, they might listen. That's what it is. You know?
Our oldest boy went down there for about a year at Cal Christian down there. Well, he'd done some field preaching. They wanted him to, but he let it try. He went to something north here somewhere. There was only a handful of women in the whole church. Handful, and they served communion. They done it all. And he wasn't happy, but he was sent up there by that. But you're not going to change it. They was trying to hold on to their church and finish at the last. He said they was all done. They finally closed it out.
I think if you read like the Corinthian letters in particular, Paul still calls these immoral, divisive, crazy people brethren. He does. Now, he never stops trying to correct them. And by the time you get halfway through 2 Corinthians, you think he's going to beat them. But the difference is he's established a rapport with them, a relationship, and a love. They know he loves them, so he can speak that way to them when he needs to. But if he had just, from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 1, said, "Do you want me to bring a whip?" it would not have been the same story. He doesn't get to that till the second half of the second letter. There's good reason for that. Again, don't want to sacrifice truth at all, just don't forget the other values that go with it.
Absolutely.
It's like the difference between a steak that's raw and unready to eat versus a steak that's cooked right and served properly.
Yeah.
It's the same food, but served very differently.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Sorry, Alex.
You're fine. Well, looking at the time, if you look at your paper 4:2, I'm going to start talking about Paul. And I can be lengthy on Paul, so I'm going to let you all out early today. But before we go, Jim Willis, would you mind praying to close us out?
Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for today, Lord. Thank you for many blessings given us. Lord, we know we're a great nation with many blessings, Lord. We study your word, Lord, we ask you put it on our hearts to expand it further in this community, Lord, to help your kingdom. We ask you to keep it safe and believe and bring us back another day. For Sunday's name, pray your thanks.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Good job. I'm sorry preachers make terrible students.
If we don't get over here with some tea and he comes to go fishing, I'll send him.
All right, I'm going to stop by your house anyway and look at that light sometime for the next week. I'll call you first. But I want to look at that light.
I'll get it down. It's up at the old house. But I got the refrigerator up here.
Okay.
There's 4 more of them. You know, you're going to be busy.
Sundays, yeah, sure. Okay.
We told you about the word name.
But you guys, if you looked at it,
It was really a good survey. I got somebody.
Yeah, I think it's something that's coming, so I don't know.
Yes.
It wasn't.
it's 2 years.
Is there a specific thing you want me to strip down?
It was just good about how you don't understand exactly what's coming on now, but yet you
We still haven't looked at anything.
Yeah, you gotta work.
But you can still,
The new
is
shower.
that the only thing?
Yeah, I can see.
Johnson, Johnson's gonna go on.
Could
It's just
also,
somebody.
I've got like map line, I also had my mom that illustration, I talked about that man who lived from like 1890 to 2004. And all the things that happened in his lifetime, so I had that.